Over the past few months, a series of unverified accounts widely circulated on various digital platforms has generated a constant stream of speculation about the circumstances surrounding the death of Chinese actor Wang Menglong. The narrative that has taken shape combines elements of spiritual testimonies, symbolic interpretations, historical comparisons, hypotheses about ancestral lineages, and a social critique that intertwines with certain users' concerns about power dynamics within the entertainment industry. This set of versions, although not supported by official sources, has captured the attention of a significant number of viewers who have been piecing together their own conclusions based on the fragments circulating online. According to various commentators on Chinese social media, one of the first elements that drew attention came from a broadcast by an analyst known as Dao. According to this creator's followers, since April, he had mentioned that a male actor with around 20 million followers on a platform called WBO would face an adverse event. Although no name was specified at the time, after the Wang Menglong case began to spread publicly, users pointed out that Dao revisited his opinion, indicating that he had then had access to certain internal sounds or rumors, but that he couldn't clearly identify who the affected figure was. Some internet users interpreted this as a retrospective indication that there was a tense atmosphere prior to the tragedy, which gave rise to the hypothesis that the actor had been, according to these unverified accounts, part of a premeditated plan. This narrative was further amplified when analyses of Wang Menglong's family origins began to circulate. Although it is publicly known that he was born and raised in Xinjiang, several people on social media claimed that his ancestral lineage is actually linked to Jiangsu province. According to these accounts, the actor's parents were part of the Han ethnic groups who, under development policies implemented decades ago, voluntarily moved to Xinjiang to participate in state-led projects. This fact, although not extraordinary in itself, opened the door to symbolic interpretations by certain users who commented that the actor's facial features, such as his high nasal bridge and defined contours, could correspond both to common characteristics in the region and to possible genetic inheritances linked to more distant ancestors. In that context, a photographic comparison began circulating between Wang Menglong and a youthful portrait traditionally associated with Emperor Zhu Yuanzhang, founder of the Ming Dynasty. Although some internet users clarified that certain images may have been generated or modified with artificial intelligence, others pointed out that when comparing these portraits with the official paintings produced after the emperor's ascension, there were striking similarities. This reasoning led some members of the public to suggest that the actor might be descended from ancient Ming lineages, a theory without documentary support, but recurring in digital conversations, where history, symbolism, and contemporary speculation intertwine. The discussions also referenced widely publicized historical episodes, such as that of Chu Ziqiao, son of the last Ming emperor who is said to have lived in hiding for decades in southern regions to avoid persecution. Some internet users used examples like this as a basis to argue that in areas such as Huai'an or Yangzhou, families whose surnames changed over time still preserve oral accounts of lineages dating back to imperial times. This narrative construct, although lacking historical confirmation, provides an interpretive framework that certain users employed to reinforce the idea that the actor's possible special origins might have made him a target of dark forces, at least according to these unverified accounts. In parallel, various online channels disseminated statements attributed to an individual known as Maxian, described as a fortune teller or spiritual reader. According to those who quoted his words, this commentator claimed that Wang Menglong possessed an imperial destiny, and that, consequently, he had been symbolically marked by high-powered groups who, within the framework of these narratives, would seek to absorb or steal his life force. These formulations were expressed in metaphorical language characteristic of divinatory practices, but some users interpreted them as a possible explanation for the circumstances surrounding the actor's death. The narrative took an even more complex turn when, according to numerous videos and posts circulating online, an American medium named Candace Starr declared that she had received a series of spiritual impressions related to the actor. According to the disseminated content, the creator, who claims to have been previously unaware of the case, asserted that a few days before Wang's death, someone had offered him a drink similar to a very strong tea that had made him drowsy. According to the account attributed to the medium, this loss of consciousness would have allowed several people to immobilize the actor and lock him up, a description that internet users linked to the captivity theory. Starr also reportedly claimed that, in his spiritual experience, the actor's soul conveyed to him that many individuals within the entertainment industry had experienced similar situations. According to this version, the actor's death would constitute a deterrent message directed at other professionals in the industry. These claims, widely shared but impossible to verify, quickly became part of a mosaic of theories seeking to attribute symbolic or structural motives to a case that lacks official confirmation in the terms proposed by such accounts. Likewise, the statement was circulated that the medium had seen metaphorical or symbolic scenes in an old hotel, where abandoned objects and elements she interpreted as representations of human bodies had appeared. According to users who commented on these visions, the medium reportedly indicated that these images corresponded to practices categorized as art by those who had carried them out, which heightened the audience's unease and fueled interpretations of rituals or symbolic procedures. The first section of this rewrite shows how a single case, without official confirmation, can develop within the digital ecosystem into a complex network of interpretations, spiritual hypotheses, historical comparisons, and extended theories that gain narrative force as they are reproduced, commented on, and reinterpreted by different online communities. The body of narratives surrounding the Wang Menglong case continued to expand as various commentators began linking the American medium's claims with interpretations from another purported spiritual specialist, identified on social media as T. William. According to users who followed these posts, this individual had also described, from a spiritual or symbolic perspective, images of confinement, prolonged suffering, and a sacrifice associated with a dark ritual. Although there is no independent verification to support these statements, their coordinated dissemination across multiple platforms created a sense of narrative alignment that many internet users interpreted as a form of indirect corroboration, even though the materials are unconfirmed and highly speculative. The accounts associated with T. William added that not only had Wang Menglong been a victim of such dynamics, but that, according to his interpretation, there were other individuals being held in similar conditions. By their very nature, such statements are difficult to verify, but their circulation led many users to associate the actor's story with recurring patterns in discussions about public figures who supposedly challenge power structures. Consequently, some viewers on social media saw in this set of narratives an implicit critique of the lack of transparency in certain institutional sectors, even though the shared content provides no tangible evidence. At this point, the digital debate began to incorporate another widely discussed case, that of Wang Xiangjun, known as the King of Tibetan Adventure, a figure with millions of followers who also died under controversial circumstances, according to various users. According to materials circulated on Chinese platforms, Wang Xiangjun had spent several years exploring remote areas of the Tibetan Plateau, documenting glaciers, hard-to-reach landscapes, and natural phenomena linked to glacial melt. His images garnered considerable international attention, and, according to reports at the time, he even spoke at a United Nations conference on climate change. However, a year after his international exposure, news of his death circulated during a live broadcast. The official version stated that the content creator had accidentally slipped and fallen into an ice waterfall, while accompanied by a collaborator identified as Xiao Jia. However, numerous internet users pointed out inconsistencies between this explanation and certain visual elements that appeared in shared recordings. Among the doubts raised were perceived changes in clothing, alterations to the video sequence, discrepancies in the companion's account of events, and the absence of a clear record of the exact moment of the accident. These observations, coming from anonymous users and lacking official backing, quickly became part of a widespread atmosphere of suspicion. Wang Xiangjun's own father, according to posts shared by internet users, reportedly expressed doubts about the identity of the body recovered months later. Claims such as differences in height, the absence of hair, or facial features that did not fully match were frequently repeated on social media. Although there is no verifiable documentation to confirm these statements, the dissemination of such comments contributed to reinforcing the perception of opacity surrounding the case. According to some users, the family's requests for an independent forensic evaluation were reportedly rejected, an element that, within the digital narrative, was interpreted as indirect evidence that undisclosed information existed. Another point that fueled speculation was the circulation of a clip in which Wang Xiangjun, according to shared posts, had recorded a medical helicopter flying over Tibet. The aircraft bore inscriptions related to medical institutions in other cities. Several internet users claimed that, according to individuals familiar with specialized air services, such helicopters could be used to transport human organs. These conclusions, based solely on user speculation, led to much broader hypotheses linking the Tibetan region to the existence of clandestine organ harvesting networks, although there is no direct evidence to support such claims. In parallel, within this speculative environment, some viewers reviewed the creator's earlier videos and pointed out that he himself had commented on the unexplained disappearances of hikers and travelers in remote areas. Scenes recorded by Wang were also circulated, showing isolated buildings in mountainous areas and partially burned objects, such as student ID cards. These elements were interpreted by multiple users as evidence of unexplained activities, adding an additional narrative component that links the unknown, the remote, and the supposedly forbidden. Wang Xiangjun's last broadcast, according to shared accounts, further reinforced suspicions. Various internet users commented that during a live broadcast prior to his death, the creator had remained silent for an extended period and whispered words that viewers interpreted as a plea for help. They also pointed out that when asked to blink if he was in danger, he reportedly blinked repeatedly. Although these details come from viewers' subjective interpretations, they have been widely disseminated and used to support the theory that the creator was under pressure or surveillance. Over time, images began circulating that, according to users, showed the creator surrounded by several men speaking with a northeastern Chinese accent. In these posts, it was claimed that his teeth showed significant damage, which internet users interpreted as a sign of physical suffering. The immediate connection that many drew between this case and that of Wang Menglong created a narrative parallel in which both episodes became symbols of a broader issue, always based on unconfirmed accounts. The debate continued to evolve when, according to certain reports, it was claimed that Wang Xiangjun's body, or a specimen attributed to him, may have appeared in an art exhibition at a museum in Beijing. This version, equally unconfirmed, caused a strong impact among users and amplified concerns about the alleged existence of hidden structures operating without oversight. As in the previous cases, such claims have not been verified by institutional sources, but their circulation consolidated a narrative that blends mystery, social criticism, symbolism, and suspicion. At the same time, various analyses circulated by internet users cited foreign media articles addressing the existence of underground facilities, isolated military complexes, and advanced research systems in different regions of China. Within this speculative framework, some users linked reports of disappearances and organ trafficking to military strategies, biotechnology doctrines, and the concept of biological warfare mentioned in geopolitical debates. Most of these associations lack verifiable evidence, but their systematic repetition helped form a cohesive narrative that many users accepted as a possible interpretation. In this second part, we see how the accumulation of unverified information, combined with personal interpretations, perceived coincidences, and spiritual accounts, weaves a narrative framework that seems to offer answers to complex questions, even though those answers do not come from official investigations. The reiteration of these stories across multiple channels ultimately creates the impression that there is a coherent structure behind the events, although this coherence stems primarily from repetition and reinterpretation rather than from demonstrable evidence. As online discussions evolved, various users began integrating into the overall narrative different content from articles and analyses published by international media. These texts, according to the internet users who cited them, described alleged internal practices of the Chinese army and mentioned the existence of highly restricted facilities, accelerated technological development models, and strategic doctrines oriented toward biotechnology. Although many of these references are based on personal interpretations or out of context excerpts, their repetition allowed them to become established as explanatory elements within the speculative framework built around the cases of Wang Menglong and Wang Xiangjun. One of the most widely discussed aspects was the alleged existence of underground cities located between Beijing and the Hebei Mountains, mentioned in some articles as part of a system of shelters intended for high-ranking government officials in the event of a national crisis. These reports, although they have been part of public debate for years, were interpreted by some internet users as additional evidence that certain institutions maintain parallel operational networks unknown to the general public. According to these accounts, the engineers and workers involved in the construction of such facilities would have been subject to strict confidentiality controls, which contributed to the growing aura of mystery. Based on these ideas, several users linked these infrastructures to narratives about disappearances, the aerial transport of organs, and alleged human experiments described in unverified publications. Consequently, a narrative framework emerged in which biotechnology, genetic research, and political secrecy were presented as pieces of the same puzzle. The complexity of these topics allowed various users to integrate, by association, technical discussions on biological weapons, gene editing, and theories related to the prolongation of human life. In this way, the digital narrative acquired a futuristic dimension that blended real scientific elements with imprecise interpretations or speculative conclusions. Among the aspects that most caught users' attention was a widely cited reference to statements attributed to a former executive of a Chinese military institution who reportedly claimed that advances in biotechnology could give rise to synthetic pathogens that are more resistant or harder to detect. Although such comments are typically part of academic debates on biosafety, In the digital sphere, they were interpreted as signs that there was a deliberate strategy aimed at using genetic tools for military purposes. This conclusion, lacking any documentary support to confirm it, fueled both the concern and the fascination of internet users who were following the development of these theories. In parallel, references to brain machine interface technologies began to circulate, particularly those that use electroencephalography and artificial intelligence systems to interpret neural signals. According to the shared posts, such technologies would have been developed in collaboration between military medical institutions and private companies. According to those who spread this information, these advances would be linked to experiments exploring the boundaries between the human body and computational systems, expanding surveillance and control capabilities. Although such claims stem from amplified and unverified interpretations, their inclusion in the narrative increased the overall level of concern. Based on this set of elements, some internet users formulated theories that both Wang Menglong and Wang Xiangjun had been exposed to power structures operating in restricted spheres, linked to practices combining advanced technology, experimentation, and intimidation tactics. These theories, which lack official verification, are fueled by the juxtaposition of scattered data. User-reported disappearances, video interpretations, spiritual accounts from mediums, articles on genetic research, and suspicions of military activities. The convergence of all these fragments creates a sense of narrative coherence, even though each piece comes from different contexts and has no demonstrable relationship to the others. Another recurring aspect in the discussions was the concept of punishment or warning, attributed by certain commentators to the deaths of public figures. According to these users, the circumstances described in the unverified accounts could be interpreted as messages intended to discourage other professionals from investigating sensitive topics or reporting practices deemed unacceptable. These conclusions are based on subjective interpretations and lack independent evidence, but their dissemination created an emotional climate in which many viewers perceived a pattern of events that seemed to repeat itself. Likewise, some users referred to the recent natural phenomena that have occurred in various regions of China, including earthquakes, floods, and meteorological anomalies. According to these interpretations, such events could be considered symbolic signs of imbalance or retribution in a moral or philosophical sense. These ideas were mixed with spiritual accounts spread by mediums who claimed that Wang Menglong's spirit would remain in this world to awaken people to hidden dynamics. Although they are metaphorical constructs, they were integrated by internet users as key components of a narrative in which physical and spiritual events intertwined to form a transcendental message. As these narratives spread, parallels began to emerge between contemporary cases and historical episodes, associated with periods of dynastic instability, political purges, or esoteric practices. Users drew comparative lines between current power dynamics and events from earlier eras, including references to emperors, exiled heirs, hidden lineages, and ritual practices. These comparisons, although not directly related to the current cases, serve to reinforce the perception of continuity between past and present, a common narrative device when seeking to lend historical depth to a contemporary event. Claims about military facilities dedicated to genetic research and biological manipulation, although derived from unverified reports, added an additional layer of complexity to the digital narrative. Some users began linking these alleged developments to concepts such as extreme life extension, citing statements attributed to political figures who reportedly said that a 70-year-old could be considered young in the future. Although such phrases may have originated in discourses about medical advances and longevity expectations, they were reinterpreted within the context of an alleged immortalist pursuit linked to power dynamics. This process of reinterpretation led many viewers to link spiritual narratives, such as the claims that Wang Menglong was a being of light, with theories about vital energy, sacrifice, and the alleged extraction of biological resources for experimental purposes. The blend of mystical elements with scientific discussions produced a narrative effect in which both dimensions seemed to complement each other, even though they stem from entirely distinct epistemic traditions. In this way, the case ceased to be perceived solely as an individual event and came to be interpreted as part of a broader system that would include spiritual, social, biological, and technological aspects. The third part of this rewrite highlights how online narratives can combine isolated data, subjective interpretations, symbolic content, and scientific elements to construct a unified narrative that appears to offer complete explanations, even though those explanations are not based on verified research. This process of narrative accumulation demonstrates how easily a story can be expanded and made more complex when it is reproduced in a digital environment that favors speculation, constant reinterpretation, and pattern seeking. As digital discussions continued to expand, many internet users began to interpret recent events in China as signs of a period of socio-political tension. On various platforms, users shared images and videos purportedly documenting protests, banners with critical messages, and expressions of public discontent. Although much of this material could not be independently verified, its circulation led numerous commentators to associate these phenomena with a broader narrative, suggesting that Chinese society was undergoing a process of questioning institutional structures. These interpretations were quickly integrated into the narrative surrounding the cases of Wang Menglong and Wang Xiangjun. According to a significant portion of the public, the circumstances described in the unverified accounts not only represented individual tragedies, but also served as symbolic indicators of a broader system operating under logics of control, secrecy, and extreme information management. Although these kinds of conclusions are not based on official investigations, their constant repetition on social media generated a perception of coherence that led many viewers to accept such hypotheses as plausible within the narrative universe formed by the digital community. In parallel, multiple debates arose about the relationship between natural phenomena and processes of moral retribution. According to spiritual interpretations circulated by some users, the recent natural disasters, including earthquakes, floods, and unusual atmospheric events, could constitute signs of imbalance. This reasoning, deeply symbolic and unsupported by scientific evidence, was used as a narrative device to reinforce the idea that there is a relationship between human events and a kind of cosmic or moral reaction. The integration of these elements contributed to creating a scenario in which the political, the natural, and the spiritual were continuously intertwined. In this context, numerous internet users picked up on statements attributed to the American medium Candace Starr, according to whom Wang Menglong's soul remains present on this plane with a purpose of warning and awakening. For the users who shared these interpretations, the persistence of the spirit was not to be understood as a literal phenomenon, but as a metaphor for the influence the actor would continue to exert on public consciousness. From this perspective, the actor's figure would have become a symbol that allows viewers to reflect on broader structural dynamics, regardless of the veracity of the stories circulated. Theories about a possible warning message have been reiterated in various ways by users. According to these accounts, the circumstances attributed to the actor's death, including elements such as the alleged captivity, the administration of unknown substances, or the presence of multiple individuals involved, would constitute examples of an intimidation mechanism supposedly aimed at those who challenge or question certain power structures. Again, these conclusions are based on subjective interpretations, and there are no official documents to support them. However, the emotional power of these narratives has contributed to their widespread dissemination. Within this set of interpretations, some users drew parallels with ritual or artistic practices that incorporate bodily elements in a symbolic way. According to accounts circulated by internet users citing the medium's spiritual visions, the images of dark rooms, abandoned objects, and anatomical remains were interpreted as representations of a macabre aesthetic that certain groups would consider a form of art. Although there is no verifiable evidence to confirm the existence of such spaces or practices, the symbolic power of this description fueled the collective imagination and reinforced a narrative in which the human body becomes a material component in processes that blend art, power, and violence. At the same time, online discussions resumed about the alleged discovery of a body specimen attributed to Wang Xiangjun in a Beijing museum. The lack of independent confirmation of this information did not prevent numerous users from incorporating it into the overall narrative. The idea that a public figure could become an object of artistic display after death was interpreted by many internet users as an extreme form of dehumanization, which intensified concerns about the mystifications surrounding clandestine practices linked to powerful institutions. The spread of these hypotheses was accompanied by comments citing foreign media analyses describing alleged organ harvesting practices in secret detention centers. Although these publications cover complex debates, in the digital environment they were simplified, giving rise to interpretations in which advanced medical facilities, closed military installations, and vulnerable populations were linked in a single narrative of extreme exploitation. The result was a narrative ecosystem in which genuine human rights concerns were mixed with speculations based on fragmented or unconfirmed information. This amalgamation of elements allowed some users to draw connections between spiritual phenomena, geopolitical theories, and advanced scientific practices. In particular, the idea arose that certain groups in power would seek to prolong their lives through the use of biological technologies. Part of this speculation was based on comments attributed to political figures, according to which medical advances could significantly extend human longevity. Although such statements can be interpreted as generic reflections on scientific progress, In digital communities, they were incorporated as clues that would reinforce the narrative of the pursuit of power through unconventional means. Throughout these discussions, the figure of Wang Menglong was transformed into a symbol that netizens associated with purity, discipline, and luminous energy, terms used in the spiritual accounts that were circulated. Within this interpretive framework, the actor would represent a form of moral or personal integrity that, according to these narratives, made him the target of dark forces. Although these interpretations lack verification, their repetition generated an almost mythical image of the actor so that his story ceased to be perceived merely as a tragic case and came to be regarded as a parable about the vulnerability of those with a high public profile. The speculative process also gave rise to interpretations of the concept of sacrifice. According to some users, the actor's death would be a symbolic reminder of human fragility in the face of power systems that operate without transparency. These conclusions arise from the collective reading of various fragments of information, not from verified research. However, they function as an interpretive framework that allows viewers to make sense of a series of events which, due to their complexity and ambiguity, generate uncertainty and unease. This fourth part demonstrates how digital narrative continues to expand through the incorporation of new, symbolic, political, and emotional elements. The repetition of these stories gives the impression that there is a hidden structure connecting all the phenomena described, even though such a connection cannot be demonstrated. In this sense, the process of narrative construction on social media not only reflects the human need to find explanations, but also the digital community's ability to generate complex interpretive frameworks from fragmentary or unverified information. In the final phase of this collective narrative, numerous users began to interpret the series of events as a mirror reflecting deeper tensions in the contemporary social environment. From this perspective, the stories about Wang Menglong and Wang Xiangjun were not perceived merely as isolated tragedies or as sequences of speculative elements, but as a synthesis of socio-political, spiritual, technological, and ethical concerns that permeate the digital imaginary. Within this framework, some commentators argued that the cases served as a reminder of human vulnerability in the face of complex systems operating with the logic of opacity. The impossibility of independently verifying most claims, whether spiritual, technological, medical, or geopolitical, became a central point of discussion. According to these users, the lack of official clarity opens up an interpretive space that the digital community fills with narratives constructed from fragments, intuitions, emotions, and symbols. This dynamic, characteristic of contemporary communication environments, allows unconfirmed accounts to acquire the emotional weight of a coherent explanation, even when they come from divergent or unverified sources. Another recurring line of discussion centered on the idea that recent events served as a wake-up call. From the symbolic perspective adopted by some internet users, the succession of cases attributed to public figures reflected a situation in which certain individuals, by virtue of their visibility, independence, or apparent integrity, may have been interpreted as threats to power structures that are difficult to identify. Although there is no evidence to corroborate this interpretation, the digital narrative adopted it as an analytical framework, reinforcing the idea that tragic events can serve as implicit warnings within a non-transparent system. Spiritual accounts played a decisive role in this narrative construction. The interpretations attributed to mediums, according to whom Wang Menglong's spirit remained present, acting as a guide or warning, became key elements in explaining the public's continued interest in the case. These versions suggest that the actor's persona had acquired a transcendental significance, no longer confined to his public life, but extended to a symbolic function in the collective consciousness. Although such claims belong to the realm of subjective experience, their integration into the digital narrative allowed many users to interpret the events as part of a process of moral awakening. Likewise, the reference to recent natural events was used to reinforce the idea that there is a relationship between social imbalances and physical manifestations in the environment. Although these arguments are not supported by scientific evidence, their metaphorical value was sufficient to solidify the interpretation that natural phenomena constituted signs of a cycle of transformation. According to this symbolic reading, whatever the community perceived as unjust or disproportionate would trigger a cosmic or universal response that would eventually lead to a moral reordering. To this set of interpretations was added the idea that the cases described could have a pedagogical impact on the public. For certain users, unverified accounts serve a function, whether real or imagined, by prompting reflection on the importance of institutional transparency, the protection of human rights, and the need to question systems that operate without visible oversight. From this perspective, the stories of Wang Menglong and Wang Xiangjun would serve as dramatic examples used by the digital community to express broader concerns that go beyond the individual events. On the other hand, Many internet users highlighted the emotional dimension present in all of these narratives. Tragedy, mystery, suffering, resistance, and spiritual symbolism combined to create a narrative that resonated deeply with the audience. The intensity of this emotional content allowed even users who were previously unfamiliar with the figures involved to feel connected to the story. Consequently, the case transcended its initial scope and became a collective phenomenon that revealed the human need to make sense of inexplicable events. At the structural level, the development of these narratives demonstrates the digital environment's capacity to function as a symbolic laboratory where hypotheses, intuitions, and theories aimed at making sense of reality are tested. Although these accounts cannot be considered evidence of confirmed facts, they do reflect contemporary concerns: institutional distrust, interest in the supernatural, concern about the ethical limits of technology, and fascination with opaque power dynamics. The combination of these factors generates complex stories that, although speculative, have a strong emotional and social impact. In the final phase of the analysis, it becomes evident that the collective narrative constructed around these cases not only speaks to the figures involved, but also to the community that produces it. The way users interpret, amplify, and rework information reveals deep cultural tensions related to the pursuit of truth, the need for symbolic justice, and concern over practices considered inhumane. Although most of these accounts lack verifiable confirmation, their massive circulation demonstrates the power of digital storytelling as a tool for reflection, warning, and catharsis. According to this reading, the stories of Wang Menglong and Wang Xiangjun serve as mirrors reflecting collective fears, the loss of autonomy, the abuse of power, technological manipulation, and the possibility that hidden structures may operate beyond public scrutiny. For many users, these narratives serve as a reminder that contemporary societies must maintain constant vigilance to prevent opaque dynamics from becoming normalized practices. Although these fears are expressed through unverified accounts, their presence in public discourse reveals a desire for greater transparency, protection, and human dignity. In conclusion, the analyzed narrative shows how, in the absence of clear official information, the interpretive void is filled by collectively crafted stories that combine spirituality, symbolism, and speculation. Beyond the veracity of these claims, the narrative process reflects a deep social tension that manifests as open questions. How is the integrity of public figures protected? What power dynamics influence the cultural environment? What role do technology and science play in societies seeking to control or prolong life? And how does the community interpret tragedies when there are no clear answers? The final analysis confirms that these narratives, even though unverified, have become vehicles for expressing collective concerns about justice, power, and morality. The symbolic construction crafted by users imbues the cases with a broader meaning, framing them within a social reflection that far exceeds individual events. In this way, the digital narrative becomes a space where the community attempts to understand a world perceived as complex, uncertain, and sometimes deeply opaque. If you find this analysis useful and would like to continue exploring how these narratives are constructed and evolve in the digital space, we invite you to leave your feedback in the comments. Your participation helps broaden the debate and better understand the mechanisms by which information circulates in contemporary society. To receive future updates and similar studies, you can click like, share this content, and subscribe to the channel. We deeply appreciate your time and interest.